Most churches think about security in terms of physical threats, but some of the most damaging risks today are digital. Because when churches fail to protect member and donor information, the issue becomes bigger than technology. Now it's an issue of trust. Welcome to the Faith Secure podcast, where we are watchful, prayerful, and prepared. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Brown, and throughout this season, we've discussed physical security, emergency management, preparedness, and leadership responsibility. But today, we're going to do a little twist. We're going to expand that conversation into an area that many churches, I believe, are overlooking, and that's data privacy and information security. Today's guest I'm delighted to have on the podcast is Mr. Ryan Wilson, Esquire, an attorney focused on data privacy, AI governance, and security compliance. Today's conversation focuses on what churches must understand about protecting member and donor information, organizational responsibility, and why digital risk is now part of modern church leadership. I want to welcome Mr. Wilson to the podcast. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, no problem. You ready to dive right in, sir?
Let's do it.
Okay. In this first segment of Mr. Wilson, we're going to deal with the hidden risks that churches just don't see. And the opening question I have for you is, when churches think about security, they often think about physical safety. Why do so many overlook digital and data-related risk?
Well, it's sort of twofold. One, it's not as noticeable. The consequences aren't as dire, so to speak, as an active shooter, right?
Yes.
So when you go to security, you're thinking about protecting life and limb. But
Right.
The other part of that is people don't recognize personal information as a protectable asset. Since it's digital, so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You don't really think about it, unless you had sort of experience with it personally, been a part of a breach or had some kind of reason to focus on it. It's just kind of floating around in the cloud,
Wow. Okay. So let me ask you this. Why are churches potentially attractive targets for these type of data-related risks?
Well, one, if you have a significant amount of sensitive information that you collect, and you are most likely not very secure, so you're an attractive target because easy pickings for cyber, really.
Yes. Okay. So let me ask you, Mr. Wilson, what type of sensitive information are churches generally handling?
You can have, of course, banking information, credit card, debit card information. Maybe if you've done background checks on employees, you may have that information in your files. Pastoral counseling notes, those kinds of things are sensitive or highly confidential and can be used or weaponized against the individual if the right person or the wrong person gained access to them. So those are the main.
That's true. Now, do you feel in your experience maybe that leaders underestimate the consequences of a data breach?
Yeah, we could say that. They underestimate or just aren't really aware. Again, like I said, it's probably stems from most people don't see it as a protectable asset. So the consequences of not protecting it aren't really at the front of mind either. So I think it's really more of an awareness issue.
Okay. I'm gonna hit you with a quick clip question. What is one digital risk that you think churches are overlooking right now?
Ransomware attacks. The simplicity with which a cyber criminal can execute a ransomware attack, it's easy to just purchase or basically buy access to a platform that will create this type of malware, and you can deploy it without having any type of coding experience or any technical expertise. Really, you just kind of pay for it. And it's, it's got multiple ways of being deployed. You can malicious email attachments, phishing scams. You can even, maybe a more sophisticated attacker can exploit software vulnerabilities. And once the ransomware is deployed, it will proliferate throughout your system, lock down your access, and you can't get, access back because it encrypts. A part of it is encrypting your drives and your information, and so you have to sort of hopefully you got adequate backups, but sometimes it comes down to having to pay the cyber criminal for the encryption key to get access back to your information. So it's really, really simple to deploy, but really, really devastating in effect.
Wow. Okay. All right. And that was explained very well. Thank you for that. So now we're going to flow into the next segment, into trust, stewardship, and responsibility. So I'm going to ask you this. How should church leaders think differently about protecting member and donor information?
It is a matter of stewardship. In our context, we are, operating under the belief that all things belong to God, and that church leaders, the church is stewarding these funds or access to these funds as a representative of God, right? Your parishioners are giving their tithes. They're not giving them to the pastor. They're not giving those tithes to the church. They're giving it unto the Lord. And so, the church is playing the, intermediary, so to speak. But you have access to the money. You also have to be responsible with the data. And I think most, churches are aware, we collect a certain amount of money. We want to make sure we're responsible with it. We can account for what we've done with it. But the related aspect is the actual financial information that's provided so that you can get access to those funds. That is the responsibility, that it's a part of being accountable and of being a good student of what God has entrusted you with. So we can't overlook that aspect of it.
Wow, that's very well said. I'm going to ask you this. So if there is a breach, how can that impact relationships and credibility with the church?
Trust is the foundation of everything the church does, the church body does. It builds on trust, and not adequately protecting information or being subject to a data breach. It ruins that trust. And, again, if we're talking about the church is being able to sustain itself and carry out its ministries based on its tithes and offerings, and you start having situations where people's personal information, financial information are disclosed to cyber criminals, that can negatively impact, the church. I mean, you lose the trust, and so you're less likely to, donate. I mean, maybe they'll carry cash around, but in this day,
but yeah, it's going to impact it.
It's just going to impact it, because most people give through, online or text to give, or there's more. When I came up, I remember having a tithe envelope, right?
Yes, sir.
Money, and then you drop it in the plate and it passes around. But now there's more online giving, so it's a transition to the electronic format. So that can be a real hindrance to the church if you're depending on someone to trust you with their financial details.
That's very well said. Well, let me ask you, on that same vein, a practical question. If a church has never seriously evaluated its data practices, where should leadership begin?
The first step, I would say, is a data inventory, data map. And basically what that is identifying what information you collect, where it's stored, who has access to it, how you collect it. And what that does is sort of gives you a roadmap of how this information flows throughout your network. People in the systems that you use within your church to gather and use that information. So from cell phones to your website, or any other devices that you may use, but having an understanding of who collects it, how it's stored, where it goes, and who has access to it, who's responsible for it. That's the first step, because you can't really secure it if you don't know what you have or where it is. And I like to use the example, if I could just toss a quick question out to you to illustrate this point. But if you were at home with your family and God forbid, but a home invader came in, which room in your house would you secure first?
Well, I'm secure the room where we are first.
Exactly.
So we're going to start there.
Right there, right? You've identified what's of value, your wife, your children, yourself,
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
That's the place you're going to secure first, right? You don't really
Right.
care about the garage,
Right. No.
about in the garage. So that's sort of the point of the data inventory, the data map, is making sure you have an understanding of what is where, and then you can go through the process of what needs protecting and what is, sort of okay as it is.
Right. And Mr. Wilson, that's funny you said that, because I see now in my experience as a church security consultant, and just coming from the corporate world and everything, cyber and physical security now are married.
They are.
And just as you said, you have to start with basically an assessment. Mm-hmm. So that's the same thing on the physical security side. You have to start with an assessment. Mm-hmm. If you can't fix what you don't know is broken.
Right.
So yeah, just like, so it's same thing in the cyber world. It starts with some sort of assessment to see where your posture is, to see where the gaps are. So yeah, that was very well said. Okay, we're going to go to the next segment. We're going to deal with policies, vendors, and organizational exposure. Okay. In this question, we're going to deal with exposure. What creates the greatest exposure for churches when it comes to privacy and data protection?
I would say lack of adequate employee, staff, volunteer training. Mm-hmm. I think, I forget, it's been a while since I looked at the numbers, but I think they said 80 to 90-something% of the data breaches that occur are the result of the human element, right? Somebody
Absolutely.
Just not knowing what to look out for. And that becomes your most common vector. So really having an idea of who has access to what, and understanding whether that individual's role legitimately requires them to have access to the level of information that they have access to.
Okay, well, let me ask you, I'm going to keep bowling down that alley there. What mistakes do organizations make with passwords, access, and storage, since you brought those issues up?
I would say passwords, not having a really strong password. In a corporate environment, you have a password policy, but essentially you want to have a strong password, have an understanding of what that is, making sure that they're not using repeat passwords. So it's something you use at home for your, email account, and you're also using the same thing here. And it's not easily guessable. You're not recycling the same passwords. So
that's a good point.
Those kinds of things are.
Let me ask you this. What role do third-party vendors and online giving platforms play?
That's another sort of vector that, it's a opening for attack, and having
it's a vulnerability.
Vulnerability, right? It's something you have to be aware of, both in terms of how your contract with that third party is written, in terms of what sort of responsibilities fall on what party for in the event of a data breach, especially in cloud service applications, making sure that it's a shared responsibility model. So you're making sure that you understand your role for cybersecurity in that sort of relationship. Making sure you've had your contracts with review with your counsel of choice to make sure that you're adequately protected there, and understand what roles and responsibilities fall on who. And I think a lot of churches, I won't say a lot of churches, but I know some churches, they have there's the church, but then the pastor may have a separate business that's related, where they're doing seminars or writing books or making whatever, but having a full understanding of how the information is shared between those two entities, and making sure that that separate entity, which could be smaller than the church itself, a sole proprietorship or something like that, but making sure that separate entity is adequately secured, because even though they're technically two separate entities, there's a shared sort of ownership there. So you want to make sure that you secure your church, but then you've got this other business out here that's the weak link, and that's how they get in to access your data there. So making sure you're just kind of aware of all of those.
Makes sense. That makes sense. And I'm telling you, this is things you're saying, things that I hear myself tell people. But I tell them, I say, convenience without security creates vulnerability. I tell people that. So sometimes you have to sacrifice some convenience to make sure that things are secure. So now I'm going to ask you another clip question. The first one where I asked you, where should a church begin? And you gave the response of some sort of assessment to see where you are far as your security and your data privacy situation. But now I'm going to ask you, give me a simple step that churches can do immediately to reduce their risk.
I would recommend having a penetration test, vulnerability scan performed. You work with a cybersecurity professional, an ethical hacker, and their whole role is to play the role of a cyber criminal and expose what's there. And then from that sort of report, you're able to address those weaknesses, those vulnerabilities that have been identified.
Okay.
So that would be
all right. That's pretty good there. Okay. So now we're going to go into leadership accountability in the digital age. And that leadership is a theme throughout my podcast. So this is something that I focus on. So what responsibility do pastors, boards, and executive leadership carry when it comes to protecting data?
They're the governance and oversight for the church. And so they're going to make sure that they have a board or a committee or someone that's been responsible, or a group of people preferably that's responsible for investigating sort of the church's cybersecurity posture, understanding what it does with the personal information that it collects, making sure that they have a policy in place for deleting or destroying information that, say a member leaves the church and goes elsewhere. Well, there's no need to hold on to, their credentials. I mean, their information. So making sure that there's a process in place for people to follow.
That's a good point.
To protect, secure, delete this information, and also for establishing the appropriate training for the individuals that will have access to certain information. So just kind of the overarching governance role is just making sure they understand the church's posture on privacy and cybersecurity, having something in place that can be shared with staff and volunteers in terms of get to know what the church does and what each person's responsibility is with respect to protecting this information.
Okay, so in this regard, Mr. Wilson, what conversations should the boards be having right now in this realm?
They should be identifying anyone in their membership or that's a part of the board that has some sort of experience with either cybersecurity, privacy law, or something of that nature to sort of spearhead, because they will have an idea of these sort of overarching concepts, and they can kind of break those things down into manageable tasks for other individuals to execute on. And if they have an in-house IT department, or if they work with a third party, bringing that third party in and saying, hey, we want to address our cybersecurity posture and help us sort of map out a strategy for the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to become more secure. So I think that's the best way. Obviously, in whatever location the church is, finding uh, legal counsel to help navigate with the training, privacy policy, incident response policies, those kinds of things. I mean, incident response procedures, helping them, establish that. That those are the kind of conversations they should be having. But definitely,
Okay.
the starting with the data inventory, I go back and forth between using the term a gap assessment and then an inventory, because I
Right.
kind of use gap assessment when there's a specific regulation that you're subject to, and you're making sure that you plug the gaps between your current posture and what the regulation requires. But
Okay.
for churches, I'm saying more of the inventory, and that just helps you get an understanding of your data assets, and then understanding how they are protected, if at all, understanding which devices store them, and are those things, have they been updated? Are they running outdated operating systems? Are they have other vulnerabilities for the devices that store and house that information? But that map is literally like a
Right.
road map that gets you
Right.
from one point to the next, and that's sort of the foundation for understanding your posture. So
It's good information, sir. Great information. Now, Mr. Wilson, this is my favorite segment of every podcast that I do, every episode. And this is the scenario. Okay. So I'm going to give you a scenario, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of follow-up questions from it. Okay. And this scenario is just more of what we've been talking about. The scenario is the church data breach. Okay. And just so you know, I say data and data interchangeably. So I know what you're saying.
I know what you're talking
about. So now here's the scenario, sir. The church discovers that donor information and member contact data may have been compromised after a phishing incident involving a staff member's email account. Now, here's the question. What stands out to you immediately in that scenario?
First is this employee, did they need access to the donor information for their job?
Okay, great question.
Secondly is, how was the network segmented? So to use the physical example again, if I'm in the church and let's just say we've got doors that are locked, intruder comes into the sanctuary, but they can't get into the fellowship hall or the pastor's office or the anywhere else, because all of those doors are locked. So they're sort of trapped in the sanctuary.
Okay.
Network segmentation is sort of like that. So what you take is your physical network, and then you establish sort of many virtual networks that are like individual rooms. And so at the receptionist area, and they have, of course, access. Well, they probably don't need access to, sensitive financial details. So their network, only the people, in the reception area on that network. So if one of their systems is compromised, they click on a phishing email, they submit something. Well, the intruder can't get anything. They're trapped in the sanctuary, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Network has been segmented. And then if you have, for instance, someone who's working in the financial office, but suppose their role doesn't require them to directly access it, they're in more of a support function. Well, that's where the role-based sort of access controls come into play. So if that person's account is compromised, well, the attacker isn't able to access the donor information because that particular account doesn't have the authority. It doesn't have the access.
Right.
So those kind of are the initial things that are sort of standing out from that. The other thing is making sure that the your email provider has a sort of a way to, one, report suspected phishing emails, two, having a sandboxed environment. So if it's a close call, you're not sure, you can open that specific email message into what's called a sandbox. And even if it is malicious, again, that's a sort of carve out. There's nowhere else for them to go. It's in a
Right.
safe space. So if you
Right, it's segregated. Yeah.
it's segregated. So it looks, if it looks legitimate, but it ultimately turns out not to be, you've opened it in this space and there's no harm, no foul. And then the last thing is sort of references what I was speaking to earlier was training, just how to spot a phishing email. Now, the days of misspellings and funny characters are sort of going out of the way, because with the advent of artificial intelligence, AI, cyber criminals are using that to create these phishing emails. So they're looking even more legitimate. So that's why you want to have sort of a spam filters, malicious content filters on your network, so you can have your security software, or maybe even, like I said, with your email provider, may have that actual those settings. But working with your IT professional to make sure you're covered there. Okay. Those are kind of things that stand out to kind of reduce the impact of human error, because it's going to happen. You're never going to, you can't get around human error. It's just going to happen.
It's just part, it's part of the equation. Okay, right. Now this is an important question I'm going to ask you, Mr. Wilson, dealing with messaging. Okay, how important is communication after a data breach?
Oh, it's extremely important. You need to have an incident response plan in place, because that will give you the who to call, when to call, what to do, sort of a step-by-step in the event that you have a breach. And it will help you sort of take the systems offline and eject the attacker from your network, preserve crucial information for sort of what we call the after, when you're doing the analysis, post-analysis of the breach, the lessons learned. That's what I was looking for. So you're trying to learn, what did we do wrong? What did we do right? What could be done better? But having that sort of step-by-step checklist of who to call, what to do is crucial, and it'll help you know what to communicate and to whom, if you have that incident response plan in place, and you constantly or regularly are training and reviewing it. So when it happens live, the person knows what to do.
Okay. And what about far as the messaging to the congregation, to the membership, when the breach happens? What do you recommend there?
You want to be as forthcoming as possible, but you don't want to create pandemonium.
Yeah, you go.
Right. The best thing to do is initially identify or make the statement that, because you might not always know whose information was specifically impacted. It just depends on how the data is stored, structured or unstructured. But making the congregation aware that a cybersecurity event has taken place and it's been remediated, you've addressed it, and you're taking steps to identify who may have been impacted, and those individuals will be identified or notified individually. So, you can, and then also being able to say that these are the steps that we're taking to ensure that this doesn't occur again is always good. Not just
that's always a plus. Yes. You want to throw the countermeasures out there as quick as you possibly can. Okay. Exactly. So now here's the closing segment, Mr. Wilson, and then I'm going to get you out of here. Okay. We're going to deal with awareness, responsibility, and moving forward. So what I typically do every episode, I ask the guest a reflection question. Okay. So I'm going to ask you this. After this conversation that we had, what is the first step church leaders should take regarding digital risk and data protection? I know you alluded to it earlier, but I'd like to reiterate as we close.
Yeah, I like that. So I would say it's a three-parter. The first is making sure you have a assessment of what you collect, where it's stored, who has access to it, how it's protected. The second step would be to have a penetration test, vulnerability scan to identify the weaknesses in your system, in your network, and then it'll help you prioritize the efforts to remediate those vulnerabilities. And then making sure that you have an incident response plan in place, and If you already have one in place, identify, when's the last time it was reviewed or revised, and making sure that crucial individuals are trained on it regularly. So, whether it be every 3 months, every 6 months, every 12 months, but making sure that in the event you have a cybersecurity incident, whoever identifies it is able to, address it at that point in time. So that'd be my 3 steps is determine what you have of value. That's your data. Where it is.
Okay.
Identify your vulnerabilities and sort of prioritize those based on the risk. So,
Right.
if it's less sensitive data, phone numbers or email addresses versus, debit card, credit card, social security numbers, then, you want to prioritize that more sensitive information in the protection of it. And then making sure that if there is a cybersecurity incident, people know how to respond. So
Thank you for repeating that as well, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate that. Gentlemen, just 2 quick follow-ups and I'll get you out of here. Okay. Now, how can churches move forward in this area without feeling overwhelmed? Because I know not to you, you're an expert, but to the average person, cybersecurity and anything cyber is intimidating, especially to older folks. So how can churches move forward without feeling overwhelmed?
There are the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has resources on its website. Generally, your state attorney generals will have some resources, guides for small business owners, for anyone who is sort of trying to navigate this. If you have an IT department or a contractor for IT, sitting down and talking with them about it, or legal counsel who specializes in this space, just being able to reach out to someone who does have the familiarity with these aspects and these concepts, and they can kind of walk you through, because churches vary in size and structure. And there is no one size fit all response for any of this. And so having someone who can walk with you through those things is going to be the best way. And those are sort of some, quick ways you can do. Like I said, the Federal Trade Commission or your local Attorney General's office, they usually have resources there. And then, like I said, working with your cybersecurity professional, if you have an IT department or someone you contract with for those services, they can get you at least going in the right direction. And you walk from there.
Okay. And now this is the last question, sir. What encouragement would you give leaders who haven't started yet? Feel good going out the door.
I had someone tell me this a while ago in another context, but they said that the best time to start was yesterday. The best time was today. So if you're thinking about it, you're in the right place. And so as long as you're thinking about it and you're taking some sort of action to address it, you're ahead of the game. That is the most important thing, is making this a priority, taking it seriously. And, as a steward, you're not expected to know everything about everything, but you are expected to be responsible and accountable for everything under your control. And so this is a part of that. And if you are listening to this, thinking about this, trying to take steps in this area, then you are doing the right thing. And I believe that, again, this is a church, so I'm just going to say it. I believe that God looks after his people, right? Bad things happen. That's a part of life. But I also believe that when you are taking the steps to do what is right in the sight of the Lord, he does give grace. And so
that's right. Yes, sir.
In the grace of the Lord in this moment, because you are now coming to the realization that this is a part of your role as a steward of what he has placed in your care. So
outstanding. And I couldn't agree more. Just hang out with me a little while I close out the episode, okay?
Will do.
Folks, I want to tell you that preparedness is not limited to physical security anymore, as you know by this episode. Protecting people today also means protecting their information, their trust, and the integrity of the organizations that serve them are of utmost importance. Mr. Ryan Wilson, Esquire, I want to thank you for coming onto the podcast, sir. You did an outstanding job.
Thank you.
All right. And I want to thank you, the viewers. If you want more information on this or any other church security matter, feel free to visit us at mdbconsultingagency.com/Faith Secure. And you can schedule a free 30-minute church security consultation. Until the next episode, remember to be watchful, prayerful, and prepared. God bless.